Welcome to the Athletic FC podcast with me, Akinwolere. We're already halfway through the January transfer window. So what moves should we look out for over the coming weeks? Well, let's ask the man that knows. Here's David Ornstein. Well, here with us today, we've got Jack Pitt-Brooke, who's online. We've also got David Ornstein in the studio to talk through transfers as well. Right, David, let's start with you on this. Let's talk about the deal sheet, and one that's popped up this morning in particular. Nwaneri from Arsenal could be on the move. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, it was a late call, actually, or you could say an early one, because we were preparing to have our one to watch this week as Oscar Bobb, and we'll come on to speak about him in a bit. But I was starting to hear that a Nwaneri move could well be possible on loan, with Marseille pushing to get it done. There are some others in the mix as well, Premier League and around Europe. And then literally ahead of publication, got the green lights that this is one that is good to report on. And so that's why it leads the deal sheet. A bit of lifting the curtain there on our journalistic process. So there's no agreement yet, but Marseille are in a good position on this. Depending on what time this pod airs, things could have even moved on by then. They've had positive conversations between their coach, Roberto De Zerbi, the Arsenal manager, Mikel Arteta, De Zerbi, and the player Nwaneri himself. The idea would be a straight loan, or dry loan as they call it in Europe, with no option to buy. That's because Arsenal see him as a huge part of their future. Obviously, not long ago he signed a new contract. They want to get him out to play football for 4 months, and I think he would like to as well. That wasn't the plan. I think we reported in the transfer radar towards the end of 2025 that he would be part of the squad.
As signed the contract very recently, didn't
signed the contract, part of the squad challenging for all of these major honours. There can be injuries and suspensions and whatnot, and you may say he should want to be part of what might be a trophy-winning season. On the flip side, you could argue that perhaps he wants to go out and get minutes. I think only a small number of starts in the Premier League this season. And he's not been in some of the matchday squads recently. And perhaps he thinks, I'm going to come back in the summer and then cement my place in the team, having got these minutes under my belt. It'd be a very mature way to look at it. And it seems that the conversations are moving in the direction of a loan to Marseille. There would be a loan fee involved in that. And I think the style of play that Marseille exhibit, fighting for glory themselves, needing that position filled. Roberto De Zerbi, who is a coach I think that many in the coaching fraternity like and admire and have strong relationships with. And so, let's see how this shakes up, because he's got a decision to make, which I'm led to believe is coming very soon. The Arsenal preference is there. And it's one that perhaps we didn't quite see coming, but it'd be pretty significant if it came to fruition.
Yeah, Jack, I don't know if you've seen much of Nwaneri this season or last season, in fact, but you look at Roberto De Zerbi, Marseille are currently third in Ligue 1. Could this be a player that works for a manager like that if it does go over the line?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, De Zerbi plays such a distinctive brand of football, and which I think has been really successful in so many places that he's worked so far. And I think that his Marseille team seem to embody that too. They've played some really exciting stuff over the course of the season. They've got some very talented players in the group, and I think from a sort of development perspective, it could be maybe the best possible thing for him, right? Because he'd be playing in the Champions League, he'd be playing in front of one of the best stadiums in Europe, one of the biggest and noisiest fan bases in Europe. That's a brilliant way for any young player to learn, and would be learning from, I think, one of the most interesting and distinctive attack-minded coaches in Europe. So I think it could be the perfect move for him.
Okay, well, let's talk about managers, David. I guess one of the big ones that's circulating the football ether right now is the future of Thomas Frank. Spurs will be playing Borussia Dortmund tonight in the Champions League, obviously, after the defeat to West Ham at home again. What do we hear about the future of Thomas Frank right now?
Thomas Frank will take charge of tonight's game. He led the training session on Monday and the press conference preceding the visit of Dortmund. Let's be clear, there is huge goodwill for Thomas Frank inside Tottenham, in the corridors of power, from the ownership down to the executive hierarchy. We don't know if that is unanimous. you would understand if there are some grumblings, whether it be amid exec, staff, players. We're definitely hearing that some players are dissatisfied. But those who call the shots, so we're talking this new executive leadership team, Vinay Venkatesham, Johan Langer, the sporting director, and ultimately the Lewis Family Trust, they want him to succeed. That's why they brought him in. They claim it was an extremely thorough process, and he's a likeable guy. He's obviously a good coach, and a bit more respect is needed than I think we see out there in the public domain. However, there's a realism to this as well. He is under intense pressure. His job is in the balance, you could say. I would get the feeling, the way results have been going, common sense says to you, it's a matter of when, not if he will go. But we don't know that for sure. He could beat Dortmund, win at Burnley and go on a dramatic upturn. However unlikely that feels. And Tottenham will be realistic. They will know that... I don't think they will appreciate the term out of his depth, because he's far more in his depth than many other coaches in world football. And he did a really good job at Brentford, Bromby, etc.
But it hasn't worked at Spurs.
But there is an acceptance that this might not have been the right fit. And I think that's quite clear so far on many levels. There is also an acknowledgement that the problems run much deeper than Thomas Frank. And so he may end up paying the price, as Ange Postecoglou did and many predecessors have as well. And it may continue into the future, because Tottenham are trying to rebuild on and off the pitch to become a competitive force. This quote that the new ownership came out with, they want more wins, like that night in Bilbao, is not looking so pretty right now. And I think when you look at culture, when you look at structure, when you look at leadership, when you look at medical, when you look at recruitment, when you look at salaries that are paid, Thomas Frank is one factor, but he's not the only one. And so, listen, the atmosphere has been bad. I'm fascinated to see what it will be like at the beginning of tonight, and also if it starts to go away from Thomas Frank. If it's a positive result, you can rest assured he'll stay in his job, because they want him to do well. If it doesn't, then no doubt this noise is going to ratchet up again, and certainly it's precarious. He is in a critical situation right now.
Yeah, Jack, we spoke about Thomas Frank, didn't we, with Danny Kelly on a previous podcast, and Dortmund at home in the Champions League. Spurs are poised in a good position in the league phase anyway to potentially qualify for the next phase. If Spurs win against Dortmund at home, is that enough goodwill to carry Thomas Frank to potentially stay in this job a little longer?
Well, if they win, I'm sure he'll get the Burnley game on Saturday. I do think that his future will ultimately determine more by the Premier League than by the Champions League. I still think that the way the fans reacted to him on Saturday night makes his future as Tottenham manager maybe not fully untenable, but quite untenable. I don't think he can, he survived it once. I don't think he can survive that happening again. So clearly he's under huge amounts of pressure. My sense is that it'll ultimately be his unpopularity with the fan base that will probably force him out of the job, I think, at some point, just because it's just not sustainable for a manager to be that unpopular. He is more unpopular. I do not remember a Tottenham manager being as unpopular with the fans as he is right now. Not even Nuno or Jose Mourinho or Antonio Conte or AVB were as unpopular nearly as Thomas Frank is at the moment. And I imagine that eventually, not this week, but eventually, that will be the end of him.
Yeah, but what David says is also really interesting, is that leadership as well, ownership, all that kind of conversation. People keep saying Thomas Frank, but surely some of those problems stem much deeper.
Oh yeah, there's more than enough blame to go around. There's a long list of people that you could blame for for the situation that Tottenham are in at the moment. And Thomas Frank is by no means the only one. You could easily, you could look at the hierarchy of the club. You could look at all the changes they've had behind the scenes. You could look at underinvestment in the squad in the last, 5 years, in the last 10 years. You could blame Daniel Levy for appointing him in the first place. Like, I don't think it was a good appointment. I don't think it was an appointment that fitted the expectations or the demands of Tottenham and the fan base. So there are an awful lot of people to look at. And I also think that Thomas Frank is trying to operate with a squad that isn't very good. His best three attacking players, or Tottenham's best three attacking players from last season, Solanke, Maddison and Kulusevski, not one of them has started a game yet for Thomas Frank. So, and the attacking players that he is putting out, I really don't think are top level players. So I don't think it's just about him, but I also think he's not a good fit. And there's an awful lot has to change for Tottenham to be good again.
Jack, would he have gone by now if Levy was still in charge? Because there are a lot of people saying that whatever you might claim on Daniel Levy, he was decisive. And they're accusing this regime of not being as decisive with such an important decision. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a hypothetical, but I think the answer is yes. I think Daniel Levy would have made the change. I think Daniel Levy was pretty ruthless when he knew the mood had turned. He was also capable of moving quite quickly and decisively when he had to, because everybody knew that ultimately he was in charge. And I don't think there is to say, Tottenham have got a different structure now. There is not as much power concentrated in any one individual. Now, maybe that's a good thing. That's something that the hierarchy wanted. They wanted a less personalised, less centralised way of doing things. But it does mean that there's no one person who can pull the trigger, so to speak. We all remember 4 years ago, Nuno Espirito Santo going nowhere as Tottenham manager, got massively booed off at the end of a game against Manchester United in the Premier League in October 2021. Daniel Levy that night decided to sack him, brought in Antonio Conte. It was all wrapped up incredibly quickly and ruthlessly. I'm not sure that Tottenham have the capacity to act as quickly and as ruthlessly and as decisively now as they did back then.
Okay. Right, let's move on as we're talking about managers under pressure. You've actually reported that it's looking like Palace will stick with him till the end of the season?
That's their preference.
Oh, okay. There's a nuance there.
We don't know how he will react after his comments of Friday and Saturday. And there are going to be many more news conferences and presumably points of tension as the season goes on. But Palace never intended to part ways with him. They wanted to renew his contract. It was he who decided he'll be leaving at the end of the season. So in Palace's mind, we'll run until the end of the season. He then comes out with these comments and people took that to mean his position may be untenable. But that wasn't Palace speaking. So, of course, they would have been angry, I'm sure, at what he had to say. But they let the dust settle. There were 3 scheduled days off. That wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. They don't play until they face Chelsea on Sunday. And by, I think, Sunday, the sporting director, Matt Hobbs, not Steve Parish at that point, the chairman, were having positive conversations with him. I don't know if there were apologies, because that would be quite unusual for these managers and head coaches, but we're led to believe there was some contrition or remorse of sorts. There was emotion, no doubt, and for the time being, on they go. They are active in the transfer market. That's an immediate priority to try and strengthen the squad for the second half of the season. They've got European football and a trophy to vie for. And Oliver Glasner said in that news conference after Sunderland and all of the interviews that he's not walking away. And I don't know if Palace wanting to sack him, that would come at a cost unless he's breached his contract, which is quite possible given the nature of his comments. And so I think they will try and move forward together and reunite. What's clear here is that Palace have to contingency plan for when he is going. And therefore, is it going to come about sooner? Do they start to look at their next head coach more intensively? They will have already been doing that. And do the fractures either reopen or widen in the next weeks or months? does the European campaign not go so well? And so they bring forward whatever plans, get him out the building, either get an interim in and the new person. But for the time being, it's kind of business as usual. And as awkward as that is, it's not long to go. He's involved in conversations about recruitment. I'm aware of that. And sometimes these things happen and are not the big drama that the outside world suggests. They can move forward together. And don't forget, this has happened at his previous clubs, I think at Eintracht Frankfurt and Wolfsburg. And it ended, interestingly, around almost the identical number of games to what it is now at Palace.
So he gets jittery at a particular point.
It would suggest there's a shelf life. It would suggest there is a flare-up always brewing around recruitment or whatever other issues. This was Mark Guehi off the back of Eze and not supposedly being backed in the market. Palace dispute a lot of what he said, and I can understand their perspective because they stood by him in September by pulling the plug on the Mark Guehi deal when he was going to be leaving at the end of the season, Oliver Glasner and potentially Mark Guehi. The Eze deal, anyone would have taken that at that price for a 26-year-old who had a clause previously in his contract and was probably not going to get a move of that magnitude again to his boyhood club. They've backed him in the market with a lot of signings. We can argue about how good they are, how late they were made, but they have invested heavily. They just broke their transfer record at the start of the January window, so that was early for Brennan Johnson, a player that Oliver Glasner pushed for, despite the fact that he's leaving at the end of the season. Now it came back round with Guehi again. I don't think they were going to back him to keep Guehi at the expense of losing him for nothing when they could take some money now, and there's only 4 months of the season to go, £20 million and salary saving too. And Glasner, to my knowledge, was kept abreast of the likelihood of Guehi leaving. It was that morning that it became clear where the deal was up to, but it was always a possibility. And I don't think Guehi was up for playing, by the sounds of it, when the match was 24 hours later. He was going to go for his City medical. We saw what happened with Liverpool last time round. So there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye, but on they go.
Okay. Quick one on Jean-Philippe Mateta, David. Guehi's obviously a Manchester City player now. I've seen all the social media posts. Looks very happy and content there. Mateta, if they lose Mateta, and we're talking about Glasner staying on, another star player and a player that's shone under Glasner.
Yeah, but I think Crystal Palace would have been receptive to a sale if the right price had come in. Maybe it still will. 28 years old, contract 2027, and they want around 40 million euros for him. Juventus heavily linked with him, but they don't want to go to 40 million euros. And I don't think after the shenanigans of recent days, the blows that Crystal Palace have suffered, Macclesfield, Guehi, Glasner, Sunderland, that they're going to compromise on what they want for such an important player. And therefore, Juventus have moved away from it for the time being, as far as I'm aware, and they're refocusing on someone like En-Nesyri from Fenerbahce. They're looking at the likes of Sidiki Cherif at Angers in France. But that's a young option, 19 years old. We've got a bit of a dilemma here at Palace. If the club sign players for the future, is Oliver Glasner going to play them in this final 4 months, given he was quite dismissive, to put it politely, of the bench at Sunderland, despite it including the likes of Camvo, Riyad, Uche, and so on.
Yeah, Uche hasn't hit the ground running at all, has he?
No, but they are more capable than he perhaps suggested at the Stadium of Light. And so if he's not going to play players that the club bring in, are those players going to be willing to come if they're not going to play football? Or do they back Glasner in the market, given that he's going in the summer? Maybe you might see some loans that suit all parties because they all just focus on the next 4 months. But it's a complicated situation, and I don't think right now selling Mateta will be at the top of their agenda.
Okay, quick question here from Kelvin, one of our YouTube subscribers, who asks that would Manchester United not go on the market for another coach in case Carrick has a good run? I mean, we've been here with Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, of course.
They've got to go on the market and look at options and do their due diligence. I presume the process has begun already. about a permanent manager, head coach, and they will be analysing, running the data, speaking to candidates. Don't forget they did a lot of work in the year 2024 when Erik ten Hag's contract was coming to an end. They brought De Zerbi and Thomas Tuchel to the front of the stage and then gave Ten Hag a new contract. They would have considered all of that again when Ten Hag was leaving, even though they went for Amorim straight away. And so Michael Carrick may come into that, of course. He may play his way into contention if he has a really good run to the end of the season. But that's a hypothetical that Manchester United can deal with at the time. It doesn't mean you shouldn't run your process. I expect them to. It should be thorough and diligent. And then come the summer, with contracts expiring, we've spoken about this on the pod previously, with different contractual situations, with the World Cup, and maybe also the likes of Carrick, you make a decision there, but not now.
Okay. Jack, if Carrick has a good run, does he have a good case to say, I want to be Manchester United's head coach?
Or Tottenham's.
Or Tottenham.
You're going there. Sorry.
Well, the funny thing about that is that up until he got the Man United job, I actually think he would have been the best out of work interim option for Tottenham. There's not a lot of managers on the market, but he was on the market up until a few weeks ago. And yeah, I think he should. I think if he continue, like the fact is, against Manchester City the other day, that was the best United played in years. I mean, I know,
still one game though. Still one game.
It is one game, but it was one very, very good game. And I just wonder if they can continue to play like that over the back end of this season. Well, why not? They've tried almost literally everything else. Their last two permanent managers have been guys who have had very good records in their own and won their own domestic leagues. Obviously, Ten Hag with Ajax, Ruben Amorim with Sporting. And, neither of them have really managed to make much of an impression at Manchester United, if we're honest. Obviously, Ten Hag won the FA Cup, but neither of them got United to where they need to be. So they have tried that option. They've tried the kind of the youngish foreign manager who's won his domestic league. They've tried the very experienced big name manager, and that hasn't quite worked either. So I just wonder if Carrick does really well and if he kind of develops a bit of momentum, then, well, why not?
Right, let's move on, David, because there's a question here from a YouTube subscriber. And look, you're on your phone now, so it's very apt to ask you this question. What's your daily screen time on your phone?
Oh, good question. I should probably look it up now. Got a caveat with the fact it's probably not as high in the January window as it is during the summer when there is so much more going on. This has been pretty frenzied because of the managerial changes as much as the player changes.
What you got?
It's actually down 34% from last week. So it's this week has started quite slowly.
This is a guy that keeps an eye on his screen time. He knows he has to be in check.
It's not too bad. It's around 50% of the day.
Can you just give me the number?
Well, it's sort of around 10 hours this week so far.
What are you doing?
But that's down. So
we're only on Tuesday.
Down 34%. So yeah, we're looking at the height, because at the end of last week was like Mark Guehi and Oliver Glasner off the back of Amorim and previously Maresca. I mean, it would have been double that at that point. I think during the summer we push up towards the 20-hour mark. It's incredibly unhealthy.
But
still get time to fit in a bit of paddle, gym.
Of course he does. Of course you do.
Networking.
All in one. This guy just never stops. He's a machine. All right, let's carry on to the deal sheet, because you mentioned it at the top. Oscar Bobb is attracting a fair bit of interest at the moment.
Oscar Bobb is expected to be sold by Manchester City before the window shuts. So that will have a number of clubs on high alert. We're hearing from Premier League, Bundesliga, Portugal as well, I think we mentioned in the deal sheet. Obviously, there's more competition now with the arrival of Semenyo. Bobb needs to go and play football regularly. He's had his injury problems too, of course. I'm hearing it will take around £30 million, give or take, for a permanent transfer. And we could see developments on that front this week as the market draws towards a close. But nothing done just yet. So it's one that is going to evolve. And it could be a great deal for somebody, clearly. Manchester City are receptive if their conditions are met. And they've got a pretty good record in recent times of selling players for profit, and he could be the latest.
Okay, Jack, Manchester City have spent £480 million on player fees. Mark Guehi, the new addition to that team. But if you look at their recent record, I mean, they've drawn 3 and lost once in the last 4 games. Does this just give an indication as just how much of a rebuild this team actually needs?
Yeah, absolutely. They've done so much business in the last 12 to 18 months, haven't they? I think they've probably had to, because it felt like they didn't really do that much business when they were winning the league every year, you know, like when they won the 4 in a row and they won the Champions League in 2023, they had incredible stability in the playing staff for such a long time. And they had, like, it was really the team that was, with a few additions, it was the team that Guardiola built in his second season, really, in 2017, which lasted for so long, you know, Walker, Stones, Ederson, Bernardo Silva, Mahrez, and so on, like those guys. And because they had so much stability and they didn't really make that many changes beyond adding, you know, an Akanji here, a Grealish there, a Rodri there, I think that meant that that really caught up with them, which is why I think they started the last season so badly. And because they started last season so badly, they had to kind of squeeze almost years of rebuilding into a very narrow time span. And that is why they've done so much work in the last 18 months, I think, to try and make up for lost time.
Okay. Mark Guehi obviously going to City, David. A player actually many thought might be going to Liverpool. Originally. How has that now affected their transfer dealings in the summer, perhaps even in January?
Well, Liverpool were not intending to do business in this market, and as far as I know, that remains the case. Unless something extraordinary changes, an unforeseen opportunity that may alter that stance. But as far as I know, the plan is to keep their powder dry for the summer, and at that point, they will clearly focus on the central defensive area with Ibrahima Konate due to expire. His contract's coming to an end, and there's been no breakthrough on talks over a new deal. Virgil van Dijk and Joe Gomez will be entering their final 12 months. Obviously, they were rocked by that cruel injury to Leone. And then there'll presumably be a bit of a focus on what happens when Mohamed Salah is reintegrated. Does it go well? And if so, maybe he continues towards the end of his deal, which is 2027. If it doesn't go so well and he wants to leave, or Liverpool are open to a transfer, or both parties are in favour of going their separate ways, then of course they will need to fill that wide attacking position. They obviously had an affection for Semenyo to a degree, and he went to Manchester City. So who would come in that role is very interesting. In terms of Mark Guehi, we know what happened in the summer, and Liverpool would have been there again next summer. But they don't appear to have been there this time round, and a lot of fans are asking why. The word from Liverpool is that the finances didn't make sense to them. £20 million plus salary and agents' commissions and whatever the total package would be for just 4 months of football. That's their version of events. Others will say that after what happened in the summer, he didn't want to go there and his focus was on Manchester City, where he's ended up, and says that it was always City, to quote him. Others would have been there in the summer too, possibly Arsenal, Bayern Munich were pushing hard, Barcelona were in the mix. I think he was due to go and visit maybe Bayern Munich and Barcelona, I was hearing, which he's entitled to do as a free agent. You can sign a pre-contract agreement legally with a foreign club. I think a lot has gone on in that Mark Guehi situation. We don't know the exact ins and outs of it yet. However, Manchester City put their best foot forward. They've come up trumps. They've won the race, and it's an exceptional signing. Okay.
Jack, speaking of teams that have spent almost £500 million recently, I mean, it's a staggering amount of money. We have to talk about Liverpool. £449 million spent in the summer. Obviously, in came players like Isak, Vert, Ekitike, Frimpong, and obviously Kerkez. Have you now, with a bit of more of a time to look at this, assessed their summer signing so far?
Some but not all, I think have really shone. So clearly, like, Wirtz is a fantastic player, and I think we've seen more and more from him recently. Ekitike has, I think, done really well this season and looks like a natural. He looks like a natural fit. I still don't think. I still have some questions about the whether or not it made sense to go for Ekitike and Isak in the same position in the same summer, right? I think that I often wonder if it should have been one, and then if they should have got one of them and then maybe slightly different profile of player. And we still haven't, we're still waiting to really see anything approaching the Isak who was so good at Newcastle United. So yeah, I mean, I think on an individual level, some of the signings have been good, but like as a collective, I think a lot, the jury is still very much out.
All right, just a quick question from YouTube here. This one's from Josh M. David. He says, with so many managers out of contract in the summer or in insecure positions, how much of an effect will this have on the transfer window? Do clubs sign players independent of who the manager actually is?
Ooh, what a great question. A club that is really well structured from the ownership through the executive and the sporting hierarchy in this modern, more continental model with a sporting director in place will often be working on recruitment targets irrespective of the head coach, especially if they're going through a change of head coach, and they will have the courage of their convictions to know what players they want to bring in for their playing style, engage in negotiations and get deals done. Always, to my knowledge, with input from the coach, but not necessarily a casting vote. And that's the sort of ideal practice in a continental model that involves the coach focusing on coaching. However, it's easier said than done. You've got examples of coaches, managers being in position before the sporting director. So Eddie Howe before Dan Ashworth came into Newcastle, and then they had Paul Mitchell and Ross Wilson. You have a hybrid at Arsenal where Edu was there and helped appoint Mikel Arteta, but then Mikel Arteta outlasted Edu and was part of the group that I presume decided that Andrea Berta would be the successor to Edu. And different managers gain different amounts of control and power. So at Manchester City, Arsenal, Newcastle, Aston Villa, I think the coach manager is incredibly powerful at the moment. I'm not saying that the sporting directors and the hierarchy are not, but they are more powerful than, say, the coach at Chelsea or the way Manchester United appear to be going, and some other examples. Even good case studies like, say, a Brighton, it doesn't always gel. When Roberto De Zerbi was targeting, I think, Matt Vienko from Shakhtar Donetsk, he didn't rate highly on Brighton's data that guides Tony Bloom and Paul Barber, the hierarchy in the decisions that they make. And so there was a bit of a disagreement. And often you can work those through, often it causes tension. So in response to the question, it's not a fine science. There's no clear way it's done. I think we are moving more towards a hierarchy-led decision with coaching input. But there is still, a bit of antagonism around it all, because you're seeing how when we're reporting on Crystal Palace and Chelsea and Manchester United, recruitment and who's making decisions and whose voice carries greatest weight is at the heart of what we're talking about. And so I think it will continue to be a sort of careful balancing act. And even where it's done well, there may be more difficult moments depending on the person in the dugout. The absolute key factor is to just get your story straight from the beginning. When you're going through the interview process,
this
lay
is what
down,
we want.
Yeah, the guidelines, the rules of engagement, the markers, the goalposts as to how it's going to be done at this club. And if the coach, manager signs up for that at that point, great. If they have reservations, let them be aired then, not further down the line. And I accept that's quite a halcyon vision, because as we meander through these journeys, there's success, there's failure, there's
Glasner
changes.
in particular, first time, how long Palace have won a trophy? Surely he's got some sort of clout to say, this is how I want to run this team.
First ever major trophy, and suddenly you gain credibility to a greater extent to what you already had. Maresca lifting Chelsea's
Club World Cup,
their Europa Conference League, putting them in the top four. a lot of people say to me that sort of success emboldens these coaches to try and tip the balance in their favour. Maybe they're more experienced than their superiors. Maybe they've got greater football expertise. They probably have. And so it's a constant you know what? It's like a relationship at home.
Yeah. Do you know what, Jack? David makes a really interesting point, and I feel that's what we saw towards the end of Amorim's tenure, was this kind of, in the interview process, just let me know what you want from me and maybe we can deliver that, or at least we're in agreement as to what this job is. Do we often see this kind of need for more power, especially when a coach, perhaps Amorim's not the best example here, wants more hold on how to shape the squad, considering perhaps they've won a trophy here and there, and they can finally say, look, listen to me, this is my job, I think I know what I'm doing?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that was probably the interesting thing about the sackings of both Amorim and Maresca a few weeks ago, is that it didn't really feel from the outside, to me at least, that either of them were really sacked for results. It felt like they were more sacked for political reasons, or because of the breakdown of relationships, for the things they said in public, the things they said in private. And the weird thing about that was, obviously, when Maresca got the Chelsea job in the first place, I think the assumption was that he wasn't going to be an especially powerful manager, right? And so when he started pushing on that, then it was only going to end one way. But I always remember thinking that when Amorim got the Man United job, the expectation was he was going to be a really powerful manager. And yet it seems to me like, the Manchester United hierarchy actually decided that they would start pushing him on things like the formation, for example. And it just goes to show that ultimately any manager or head coach nowadays is going to be under the kind of boundaries of their political power, and how much control do they have versus the other suits at the club. That is just such an important factor in the success or failure of any of them.
Okay, I want to talk about something very quickly, David, and please jump in, Jack, if you've got any opinions on this. And it's something that's been doing the rounds on social media, actually, is Brentford, and how Brentford have been really good at recruiting forward players. In a time where we're looking at players like Gyökeres, Sesko, who are still struggling to bed in, who have gone in for much higher fees. But Brentford, Boalin Bumo, cost 5.8 million, shifted in for 65 million to Manchester United. Jona Visa, 8.5 million, shifted in for 55 million to Newcastle. We look at Ivan Toney, obviously 5 million brought in, off to Saudi for 34 million pounds. Ollie Watkins, Mopé, the list goes on. I mean, they've been really good at that, haven't they? And we obviously talk about Thiago, of course, another one that seems to be shining. How have they managed to do that, especially when other teams are really struggling to find that centre-forward position or a striking position?
Hats off to Brentford. They're an amazing, remarkable story that can set an example to many throughout the Premier League, English football, European football, and the world game. It's why they're gaining investors who are coming and taking portions out of the club. They want to be a part of it. They're gaining admirers, plaudits, and rightly so. You didn't mention Kevin Schade, who could go for a profit. You took Igor off the tip of my tongue, and there will be others too. Even the clever investments like a Jordan Henderson, who did they pick up for free or near to that, and he's driving their midfield this season. It hasn't all been perfect, but they've maintained their Premier League status since arriving, and they appear to be flourishing. You've got to apportion credit to the ownership, which has been led by Matthew Benham, bought them up from the doldrums around the time where they were collecting coins in buckets at the previous stadium. It's a absolutely jaw-dropping story what Brentford have done. It's movie stuff, a bus stop in Hounslow. And then it goes down to the people he has empowered. So you've got Phil Giles there, you've got Lee Dykes, you had Rasmus Ankerson previously, you have got Cliff Crown, the chairman, you've got John Varney, the chief executive. These guys are working in unison. They have been for a long time. Even if there's a departure, they've gone from strength to strength. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of intelligence. Matthew Benham working on his betting data algorithms in a not too dissimilar way to his former friend, now foe, Tony Bloom at Brighton. And we've written and reported all about that relationship on The Athletic. They're clearly ahead of the game in what they're doing. They're clearly becoming a destination club for a certain type of player. They reached a bit of a pinch point in the summer just gone, because they were standing so firm on a Brian Mbeumo, on a Yohan Wissa, to the point that I was wondering what message that would send to the market, where players think they can come to Brentford, do okay and leave. Yeah. But now suddenly there's some resistance there. Is that going to kill their USP? But I don't think so. Both players made their moves. And Mbeumo doing really well. Wissa was struck by injury, but he's starting to pick up now at Newcastle. There are success stories wherever you look across the game. And they just seem to be like maximising the marginal gains, their recruitment, their scouting, their negotiations, their ability to identify coaches as well in Thomas Frank coming through the system. Now Keith Andrews, who I want to credit massively for the impact he's made so far. And from what I know, he's a brilliant guy too, and is catching the eye of many around the game, held in very high regard. And they're producing an army of set-piece coaches throughout football who are going off to the Manchester Cities and Arsenals and Tottenhams and so on. It's a brilliant case study. And, unless you're an enemy of Brentford, you can't help but say chapeau.
Yes, chapeau, Jack? Chapeau. I mean, should we give them their flowers? We don't often do it on this podcast. I think we have in terms of certain results, and Thomas Frank in particular. But, I've just listed that name of attacking prowess that have gone through the Brentford books. I mean, that's incredible recruitment.
It's amazing recruitment. It's so good. Like there are so many Premier League clubs will be so jealous of their ability to identify the best young players. Like a lot of those players who Brentford brought in for very small fees and then built up and then sold for big fees. A lot of them, would have come from mid-table French teams or Ligue 2 teams, or they were not, these were not kind of superstar kids at all. But Brentford's ability to identify which players will be able to make a big impact in the Premier League, and which will be able to grow and develop and then be sold at a profit. That is just magic. That is such an important skill in modern football. And there are so many clubs who try really, really hard to do this. There's so many clubs who would want to be able to do this, and they can't do it like Brentford. I mean, the only other one, as David mentioned, is Brighton, really, who are able to recruit that cleverly and be able to identify talent and get it into the building. It's such a hard skill, and they are, they deserve an awful lot of credit and respect for their ability to keep doing that.
Okay, fantastic. I think it's a lovely time to end it there, in the words of David and Carl Anker, actually. Chapeau. Jack, David, appreciate your time, and also thank you guys for joining us as well. We'll be back soon. For more from the Athletic FC podcast, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. We've got top journalists like David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the entire season. Make sure you don't miss an episode of the Athletic FC. You can get it wherever you get your podcasts from.